The scream echoed through the marble halls of the Bennett mansion. A pan clattered to the floor, sizzling oil spreading like fire across the tiles. The new maid, small, trembling, eyes glistening with both pain and defiance, bit her lip, refusing to cry out again. Mrs. Bennett stood above her, her diamond bracelet catching the light, her face carved with disgust. "Next time," she hissed, "learn your place." But as the maid knelt to wipe the floor, her sleeve slipped, revealing a faded scar, one that the billionaire's wife had seen once before, long ago. And from that moment, the woman who thought she ruled everything would have her world slowly undone by the one person she underestimated most, because the maid wasn't there to serve. She was there for justice. What secret was she hiding beneath? That quiet stare? Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. The car slowed before the iron gates, their gold tips catching the pale morning light. Beyond them, the Bennett estate stretched like a dream built on secrets. Windows glinting, fountains whispering, and walls too white to be honest. Elena stepped out of the taxi, clutching the single-worn suitcase that carried everything she owned and everything she didn't want anyone to know. The air smelled of roses and floor polish, the kind of perfection that hides rot beneath perfume. A man in a dark suit opened the door. "You're the new maid?" His voice was clipped, indifferent. She nodded, lowering her gaze. "Yes, sir." "Elena." She didn't give her last name. She'd already erased it on the forms. He handed her a badge and said, "Mrs. Bennett doesn't like lateness or noise." The hallway swallowed her footsteps as she entered, her reflection fragmenting in the glass panels lining the walls. Every surface shimmered, chandeliers like frozen rain, floors so polished she could see her own unease staring back. But the silence was heavy, not peaceful. Somewhere deeper in the house, raised voices echoed, then vanished behind a door that shut too quickly. In the kitchen, the senior maid, Margaret, whispered directions, as if afraid the walls might tattle. "Keep your head down. Mrs. Bennett notices everything. And don't touch the piano room. Ever." She pressed a folded uniform into Elena's hands. The fabric smelled faintly of starch and something sad. Elena thanked her softly, her eyes drifting to a framed photograph on the counter. Clara Bennett, flawless and cold beside her husband, Victor, who looked like a man carved out of steel and distance. By afternoon, Elena had learned the rhythm of the house. Meals at 8, meetings at 10, Clara's tantrums unpredictable but daily. The staff moved like ghosts, always 2 steps away from her presence. Victor was seldom home, and when he was, he passed through corridors with a phone to his ear, eyes elsewhere. But Clara filled every space she entered. The first time they met, it was over a misplaced vase. Clara's heels clicked across the marble like gunfire. "Do you know what this cost?" she demanded. Elena kept her head bowed, murmuring, "I'll clean it, ma'am." Clara's eyes narrowed, studying her face as though trying to place her from somewhere distant. Then she turned away with a tight smile. "See that you do?" The moment passed, but the weight of it lingered. That night, Elena sat on the edge of her narrow bed, unfolding a small silver locket from her pocket. Inside, the faded photograph of her mother, Maria, smiled back at her. The same gentle eyes, the same strength behind them. Her thumb brushed the glass, trembling. She could still hear her mother's voice from years ago. "Promise me, Ellie. Promise you'll never let them break you." The next morning brought rain, soft and steady against the mansion's vast windows. Elena scrubbed the floors of the east corridor, her reflection warping in the water. As she reached for her bucket, something caught her eye, a photograph hanging slightly crooked. In it, a younger Clara held a little girl, perhaps 6, grinning with missing teeth. Behind them stood a familiar figure in uniform, smiling tenderly. Her heart stuttered. It was her mother. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. The edges of the picture blurred as old memories rushed back, the sound of footsteps, a door slamming, her mother's trembling hands. She remembered the night they left the mansion years ago, her mother crying silently as they walked through the rain. And weeks later, the letter. The lie about an accident. Margaret's voice jolted her back. "Don't linger there, dear. Mrs. Bennett doesn't like the old photos." Elena nodded, but her mind was already elsewhere. She needed to know what really happened, and she knew where to start. Later that evening, while polishing the dining table, she overheard Victor's assistant speaking quietly on the phone. "Yes, the investigation files were sealed. Only Mr. Bennett and his wife have access." The words tightened something inside her. Sealed. Like her mother's grave. Like every truth this house buried beneath glass and gold. Days turned into weeks. Elena worked silently, watching, listening. She noted the way Victor's voice softened when he spoke to his daughter on the phone, how it hardened again when Clara entered the room. She saw Clara's reflection in the mirror, smiling when guests arrived, scowling when they left. The woman was a statue dressed in silk, crumbling from the inside. One afternoon, as Elena dusted the piano room, she noticed deep scratches on the lid, almost hidden beneath polish. She ran her fingers along them. Letters carved hastily, half erased. M. A.R. The rest was gone. Her chest tightened. She could almost hear her mother's laughter from that very spot, teaching her a lullaby on those same keys. A faint scent of lavender, the one her mother always wore, drifted through the air, though no one else was there. "Who gave you permission to be in here?" Clara's voice sliced through the stillness. Elena turned, startled. Clara stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Apologies, ma'am. I was told to clean—" Clara stepped closer, eyes flicking toward the scratched lid. "This room is off limits for a reason," she said, her tone sharp but laced with something almost like fear. "Some memories should stay buried." Then she turned on her heel, leaving the faint scent of perfume and hostility behind. Elena stood frozen. Her heart raced, but not from fear, from certainty. There was something in this house that Clara wanted no one to find, and that meant Elena was closer than she'd ever been. That night, thunder rolled across the hills as rain lashed the windows. Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mother's face vivid in her mind. "You died for their secrets," she whispered into the dark. "Now I'll live to uncover them." Outside her room, footsteps echoed faintly down the hall. Clara pacing again, restless, suspicious. Elena turned her face toward the sound and smiled faintly to herself. The house of glass was beginning to tremble, and when glass trembles, it eventually shatters. The morning began too perfect, sunlight pouring through tall windows, silver, cutlery gleaming, and the smell of roasted coffee drifting through the Bennett estate like a promise that would soon break. Clara Bennett sat at the head of the long oak table, her back straight, her diamond earrings catching the light like tiny, cruel stars. Across from her, Victor scrolled through his tablet, barely glancing up as the house filled with the quiet shuffle of staff preparing breakfast for his business guests. To anyone looking, they were the picture of control, powerful, polished, and poised. But beneath the calm, Clara's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her cup. Her reflection rippled in the tea's surface, older now, harder, no longer the flawless woman she used to be. She caught Victor's eyes drifting, not toward her, but toward the kitchen doorway, where Elena moved silently, setting down plates with the precision of someone who wanted to be invisible and yet somehow couldn't be. Victor's voice softened when he spoke to her. "You can set the tray there, thank you." Simple words, but Clara heard something in them she hadn't heard in years, gentleness. Her stomach tightened. The guests arrived soon after, shaking hands and laughing too loudly. Deals were discussed between bites of fruit and buttered toast. Clara smiled through it, her laughter practiced, every movement measured, but her attention never left Elena. She noticed the small things, the way Victor's gaze followed the maid when she poured his coffee, the way he thanked her without looking bored, the way he looked alive. It was unbearable. When Elena passed behind her chair, Clara's perfume thickened the air, sharp and sweet, a scent that demanded attention. "Careful," Clara said without turning. "You nearly brushed against my hair." Her tone was light, but her eyes, reflected in the silver teapot, were icy. Elena froze for a fraction of a second, then whispered, "Apologies, ma'am." The morning went on, slow and heavy. The kitchen smelled of butter, salt, and quiet nerves. Clara's jealousy grew with each polite smile Victor offered the maid. She tried to dismiss it, tried to remind herself that she was Clara Bennett, wife of the man everyone admired, mistress of the house. But that title felt thinner now, fragile as glass. Then came the moment that shattered it completely. Elena returned from the stove carrying a teapot, her hands steady despite the heat. She had done this 1,000 times, but as she reached the table, a folded napkin slipped under her foot. The tray tilted. One teacup toppled, spilling amber liquid across the pristine white tablecloth. The sound was small, but it cut through the room like thunder. Everyone froze. Elena gasped softly, stepping back. I'm so sorry." Before she could finish, Clara rose. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her voice trembled with rage and something deeper, fear. The guests shifted awkwardly. Victor started to speak, but Clara's fury drowned him out. "You think because my husband pities you, you can behave like this? You think you belong here?" Elena shook her head, voice barely audible. "It was an accident, ma'am." "Accident?" Clara's heels struck the marble floor as she moved toward the kitchen. "Let me show you what accidents cost in this house." Victor stood abruptly. "Clara," but she was already at the stove. The pan sizzled on the burner, oil bubbling angrily. Clara's breath came quick and shallow. She didn't plan it, maybe she didn't even think, but jealousy doesn't wait for reason. She grabbed the handle, turned, and with a motion too fast to stop, flung the pan toward the floor near Elena's feet. The oil splashed. A cry tore through the silence, sharp, human, unbearable. Elena stumbled back, the hot liquid streaking across her arm. The smell of burnt skin mingled with the bitter scent of coffee. For a moment, no one moved. Even Clara's anger froze on her face, replaced by shock. Then Victor shouted, "Get the doctor! Now!" His voice cracked through the paralysis. The guests scrambled out. Margaret rushed forward with a wet towel, pressing it against Elena's arm, but the damage was done. Elena didn't cry. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, eyes wide and unfocused. Somewhere in that pain, her mind wasn't in the kitchen anymore. It was years ago. She heard her mother's scream, the same smell of oil, the same cruel voice yelling, "Useless!" Her knees gave out. The room spun. Victor caught her before she hit the floor. For the first time, his expression wasn't cold or distant. It was horror. He looked at Clara, standing frozen by the stove, and something shifted in his eyes. "What have you done?" Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She looked at her husband, at the way he held the maid, the way his hand trembled as he touched her burned skin, and a wave of regret mixed with fury twisted her face. She provoked me," she stammered, but even she didn't believe it. Victor didn't answer. He lifted Elena gently, her head resting against his shoulder. "Everyone out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The remaining servants scattered. Clara stayed rooted to the spot, watching as her husband carried the maid away like something precious. When the door closed behind them, the only sound left was the faint crackle of the stove. Clara's hand trembled. She turned it over, staring at the oil that had splashed back onto her wrist, tiny blisters already forming. She pressed her lips together, refusing to flinch. Upstairs, Victor laid Elena on a couch in the study. Her skin was pale, her breathing uneven. He dampened a cloth and pressed it gently against her arm, whispering, "Stay with me." His tone surprised even himself. He had spent years speaking in orders, not pleas. But this woman, this quiet maid, had forced something in him to feel again. Elena opened her eyes briefly, confusion flickering in them. Why help me?" she murmured. "Because no one should be hurt like that," he said. His voice cracked, soft enough that only the walls could hear. She tried to sit up, but he stopped her. "Rest," he said. "I'll make sure you're safe here." Downstairs, Clara poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands. The sunlight had shifted. The once perfect room now looked like a battlefield. The staff avoided her eyes. She stared at the tablecloth, at the pale stain where the tea had spilled, a tiny, stupid accident that had stripped her mask away. For the first time, she felt the weight of her own reflection. The darling of society, reduced to a jealous stranger in her own home, she could hear faint footsteps upstairs. Her husband's voice low and gentle, and in that moment, she realized what she'd truly lost. Elena's pain faded slowly into a dull ache, but the image of Clara's face, the flash of rage, stayed burned into her memory deeper than the oil ever could. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, she thought she heard her mother's voice again, whispering from the shadows of the past. "Don't let them break you, Ellie." When night fell, the house was silent again, but something fundamental had changed. The Bennett's perfect world had cracked, and through that fracture, truth had begun to seep in. Elena lay awake in the dim room, her bandaged arm throbbing. Down the hall, she could hear Victor pacing, the sound steady, restless. Somewhere beneath the pain, she felt something strange stirring, a dangerous thing she hadn't planned for. Pity, and pity, she knew, could ruin even the best-laid plans. Elena woke to the faint sound of rain tapping against the window, the world wrapped in soft gray light. Her arm throbbed beneath the bandages, but the pain felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, until her eyes adjusted and she saw the familiar shelves of the Bennett study. She was lying on a leather couch, a thin blanket draped over her, and beside her, on the desk, sat a tray with tea, untouched and still warm. Then she saw him. Victor Bennett, the man whose name made entire cities move, sat in silence at the edge of the couch. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands stained faintly with ointment. When he realized she was awake, he didn't speak, just reached for a fresh cloth, dipping it into a bowl of cool water. The movement was careful, deliberate, like he was handling something breakable. "I called the doctor," he said finally, his voice low. "But you were already treated when he arrived." "I did what I could." Elena blinked slowly, trying to understand. "You?" He nodded, eyes fixed on the bandage as if afraid to meet hers. "I didn't want anyone else to see. My wife doesn't need another scandal." His tone was steady, but there was something buried in it, a quiet guilt she hadn't heard before. He avoided her gaze, his jaw tightening as he wrapped the cloth again, slower this time. She studied him in silence. The last time she'd seen him up close, he had been untouchable, every word calculated, every gesture polished. But now his hair was unkempt, his face drawn. He looked human, and that unsettled her more than the pain. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "Because I should have stopped her." The rain grew heavier outside. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Victor's voice broke the quiet, distant, and rough around the edges. "Clara wasn't always like this. There was an incident years ago, with one of the maids." His hands froze mid-rap as if the memory itself burned. She blamed herself. "And I let her." The air between them thickened. Elena's breath caught. She wanted to ask more, to force him to say her mother's name, but her throat locked. He didn't remember. The man she'd come to expose, the one who buried her mother's truth beneath his fortune, couldn't even recall the face of the woman he'd destroyed. He placed the last strip of bandage gently and leaned back. "You should rest. I'll have food sent up." When he left, the door closing quietly behind him, Elena stared at the ceiling. The ache in her arm pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She thought she'd feel satisfaction at seeing guilt finally touch him. Instead, all she felt was confusion and something dangerously close to pity. Over the next few days, the rhythm of the house shifted. Victor began to appear more often, first at mealtimes, then in the library, where he would pause by her cart of cleaning supplies and ask small, unexpected questions. "What do you think of this painting?" he'd ask, or, "You read, don't you?" Simple words, but they disarmed her. Each conversation felt like a thread pulling her closer to something she didn't understand. One afternoon, he asked her to deliver letters to his office. When she handed them over, he stopped her. "You're precise," he said almost to himself. "Most people rush through their work." "You don't!" Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. "When something matters, I take my time." He smiled faintly. "Then you'll do fine here." But not everyone welcomed the change. Clara noticed the small things, the way Victor's tone softened when he spoke to Elena, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long. The air in the mansion turned colder, the walls sharper. Every glance from Clara felt like a warning. One evening, Clara stood at the top of the staircase watching Victor and Elena exchange a brief conversation below. "You seem to have plenty to say these days," Clara said, her voice smooth as glass. Victor looked up, unbothered. "We were discussing household matters." "Of course," Clara replied, her smile thin. "And how fascinating those must be." Her eyes slid to Elena, sharp and unreadable. "Be careful, dear. The help sometimes forget their place." Elena bowed her head, murmuring an apology, but Clara's words struck deeper than intended. They reminded her why she was here, why she couldn't let herself forget. Every time Victor's kindness softened her anger, she thought of her mother's last days, how she'd been humiliated, discarded, left to fade away. Elena couldn't afford to feel sympathy. Not now. Still, when Victor passed her in the hall the next morning, offering a quiet, "Good morning," her resolve wavered. There was something in his eyes, a weariness she hadn't seen before, the look of a man trying to atone for something he couldn't name. Later that week, he found her in the garden, trimming the overgrown roses. "You remind me of someone," he said after a moment. "Who?" "My mother," he replied. She had that same way of listening. Like she actually heard what people didn't say. The words unsettled her. She wanted to hate him, to see him as the enemy her mother's ghost deserved. But every gesture, every unspoken apology, chipped at the wall she'd built. That night, as she cleaned the study, she caught her reflection in the window, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes tired but alive. For the first time, she wondered if vengeance was worth the cost of losing herself. She almost didn't hear the faint creak of the door opening behind her. Clara's voice drifted through the darkness, low and deliberate. "Working late, are we?" Elena turned, startled. "I was just finishing, ma'am." Clara stepped closer, her perfume thick in the air, her smile a mask of grace. "You've grown quite comfortable here, haven't you? My husband seems to think highly of you." Elena's heart pounded. "I only do my work?" Clara's gaze dropped to the floor, then paused. "What's this?" She crouched, picking up a small silver object glinting near the chair leg, a locket that must have fallen from Elena's pocket. Clara turned it over in her fingers, curiosity hardening into suspicion. "It's nothing," Elena said quickly, reaching for it. But Clara opened it before she could stop her. Inside, under the dim light, was the faded photograph of Maria, smiling beside a little girl with the same eyes that now stared back at her. For a moment, neither woman breathed. Clara's face drained of color. Recognition flickered, then vanished beneath the weight of denial. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Elena froze, every secret she'd buried rising to the surface. The silence between them felt endless, heavy with truth and danger. And in that fragile, breaking moment, she realized her mother's past was no longer hidden. It was standing right in front of her. The storm broke just after midnight. Wind clawed at the windows, rain slamming against the glass like fists demanding to be let in. The mansion, usually so pristine and still, seemed to shudder with each thunderclap. Down in the servants' quarters, Elena sat alone on her narrow bed, staring at the small silver locket lying open in her palm. Her mother's smile looked faded now, almost ghost-like. She traced the edge of the photograph with her thumb, whispering, "I'm close, Mama. I'm so close." But upstairs, footsteps echoed, quick, uneven, angry. Clara Bennett's heels cut through the silence, one after another, faster, sharper, until they stopped outside Elena's door. It flew open without warning. Clara stood in the doorway, hair undone, eyes wild, clutching that same locket in her hand. "You dropped this!" she hissed, her voice trembling with something between fury and fear. "Care to explain why you have a picture of her?" Elena froze. Rain thundered outside, drowning the sound of her heartbeat. "Give it back," she said quietly. Clara stepped forward, snapping the locket open. "Maria," she whispered. "That's her name, isn't it? I remember her now. The maid who stole from me." Her lip curled. Or so I thought. Elena stood slowly, her chair scraping the floor. "She didn't steal anything. Then why did she run?" Clara spat. "Why did she hide like a criminal if she was innocent?" Elena's eyes glistened in the dim light. "Because you destroyed her. Because you humiliated her in front of everyone. You called her a thief when she wasn't one. She came home that night, broken. And the next morning I found her." Her voice faltered, the words choking in her throat. "I found her gone." Clara's breath hitched. "You're lying." I wish I was. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Clara's anger ignited again, hotter now, desperate. "You came here to destroy us," she said, voice cracking. "You planned this, didn't you? To make me pay for something I barely remember." Elena's silence was answer enough. Clara turned toward the hallway, shouting, "Guards! Someone come!" The command was cut short by another voice, deep and commanding. "Stop!" Victor stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his shirt sleeves rolled up as though he'd been working late. The stormlight framed him in silver. "What's going on?" Clara held out the locket, her hand trembling. "She's Maria's daughter. The maid's daughter. She's been lying to us from the start." Victor's eyes fell on the locket, then on Elena. "Maria's daughter?" he repeated softly. "Yes," Elena said, her voice steady now. "You remember her, don't you?" Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, guilt, pain. He took the locket from Clara's hand and stared at it for a long time. "I thought she moved away after the accusations." "She didn't," Elena said. "She couldn't live with the shame you let happen." The room went quiet except for the storm raging outside. Victor's face seemed to pale under the flickering light. "You mean she's gone?" Elena nodded. 15 years ago. The day after you fired her." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. No, that's not possible." I told Clara to handle it quietly. To give her severance. To protect the family's name. Clara turned on him. "You told me to get rid of her, Victor. You didn't care how I did it." He looked at her horrified. You never meant anything." Clara shouted, her composure unraveling. "You just wanted it gone. Her, the whispers, the scandal. You buried it, and I carried the weight of your silence." The lightning flashed, and for an instant, all three faces were exposed. The fury, the guilt, the ache of 15 years colliding in one room. Elena's voice cut through the chaos, quiet but unyielding. "You both killed her. One with cruelty, the other with silence." Clara's hand shook. "You think I wanted her to die?" she cried. "I was angry, humiliated. I thought she betrayed me. I didn't know, but you never asked," Elena said. "You just watched her fall." Clara stumbled back, tears filling her eyes. "She was my friend once," she whispered. "Did you know that? Before all of it, she used to bring me tea every morning. We used to talk." Elena's expression softened for just a moment. "Then you know what she deserved better than anyone." Victor finally spoke, his voice breaking under the weight of the truth. "She came to me that night," he said. "She begged me to believe her. I didn't. I told her it was better to leave quietly. I thought I was saving the family, but I was just saving myself." He sank into a chair, eyes hollow. "I've lived with that choice every day since." The storm howled louder, wind rattling the windows. Clara's tears fell freely now, streaking her perfect face. "You think you're the only one who suffered?" She snapped at him. "You buried yourself in work and left me to live in this house of ghosts." I've hated every reflection I've seen since. Elena stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. I didn't come here to destroy you, she said. I came so you'd finally feel it. The helplessness my mother felt when you turned your backs on her. Victor looked up, eyes glistening. And now that we do? Elena hesitated. Now, I don't know. Clara collapsed onto the edge of the bed, sobbing quietly. The thunder softened into a distant rumble. For the first time, her arrogance was gone, stripped away, leaving something raw and fragile. I never meant for her to die, she said again, almost to herself. I just wanted to make her understand her place. Victor rose slowly and walked to the window. The storm was fading, dawn just a faint smear of blue at the horizon. We all knew our places, he murmured. We just forgot what it meant to be human. Elena watched him, torn between rage and pity. This was the moment she'd dreamed of, truth laid bare, guilt spilling into the light. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like ashes. Clara lifted her head, eyes swollen. What do you want from us, Elena? Money! Revenge! Elena shook her head. Neither. I want you to remember her. Every time you walk through these halls, every time you hear silence after laughter, I want you to remember what your power cost. The rain had stopped completely now. Only the dripping of water from the eaves broke the silence. Victor turned to her. What will you do now? She looked around the room, the house that had swallowed her mother, the walls that had watched everything and said nothing. I don't know, she said softly. But I can't stay here. She picked up the locket from Victor's hand, closing it gently. For a second, their fingers brushed, 2 lives bound by one secret too long kept. Then she walked toward the door. Behind her, Clara's sobs filled the room again, quiet and broken. Victor stood frozen, staring after Elena as though watching a ghost walk away, and somewhere deep inside the mansion, a portrait of Maria still hung in the storage room, covered in dust, smiling as if she had finally been seen. The first light of dawn crept through the windows, casting pale gold across the ruined perfection. The house, once untouchable, had cracked open at last. But in the stillness that followed, no one knew whether what came next would be healing or destruction. The house had gone silent. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that hums beneath your skin, too heavy, too aware. After that night, Clara vanished behind the locked door of her room, curtains drawn, meals left untouched. The staff moved through the halls like shadows, whispering that she'd left for good. But Elena knew better. The lights in Clara's room still flickered at odd hours. Someone who wanted to disappear wouldn't bother keeping the lights on. Victor tried to hold the mansion together, but the world outside had already caught the scent of blood. Rumors of scandal bled through news channels, whispered among shareholders, magnified by headlines. The Bennett legacy under fire. The same. Man who once dictated markets now faced microphones and flashbulbs instead of boardrooms. Elena watched him from a distance the morning he left for the press conference. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and for once there was no arrogance in his stride. Only exhaustion, and maybe resolve. You don't have to do this, she'd told him. I do, he said quietly. I hid behind silence long enough. Then he left, the door closing behind him with a soft, final sound. The staff gathered around the small kitchen radio later that day, listening to his voice broadcast live. He sounded older, stripped bare. There are no excuses, he said. I allowed injustice in my home, and I stayed silent because it was easier, but silence protects no one. It only destroys slower. His confession spread like wildfire. Some called it courage, others weakness. But for the first time in years, he sounded human. That night, the rain returned, soft and steady. Elena couldn't sleep. She found herself walking through the quiet halls until she reached the kitchen, the same place where everything began, where oil once sizzled and pain had taken form. The lights were on. Clara sat at the counter, barefoot, wrapped in a shawl too large for her frail shoulders. The woman who once ruled this mansion like a queen now looked small, her face bare of makeup, her eyes hollow. She stared into an empty teacup as though trying to read the past in its reflection. "I thought you'd left," Elena said softly. Clara's voice cracked. "I did, for a while. But it turns out you can't run from yourself." She turned, her gaze heavy with exhaustion. "Do you know what envy does, Elena? It eats you slowly. Maria, your mother. She had this light. Everyone saw it. I hated her for it. I told myself she was pretending, that her kindness was a lie. But it wasn't." Elena stepped closer, her breath catching at the sound of her mother's name. Clara looked down at her trembling hands. "I destroyed her because I couldn't stand to see goodness where I'd lost mine. That day, when I accused her, I thought it would make me feel powerful again. Instead, it hollowed me out." The rain tapped softly on the window, the same rhythm as Elena's heartbeat. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Clara whispered. "I know I don't deserve it, but I needed to tell you, before I disappear completely." Elena said nothing for a long time. The memories of her mother's laughter, her warmth, her quiet strength, all of it collided with the sight of this broken woman, and suddenly, vengeance felt too small, too empty. "You're right," Elena said quietly. "You don't deserve forgiveness." Clara's eyes closed as if expecting the words to burn. But my mother would have given it anyway. When Clara looked up, tears were already streaming down her cheeks. She reached for Elena's hand, but stopped halfway, afraid. Elena didn't move. She let the silence fill the space between them, a fragile kind of peace neither of them understood. "I don't know how to start over," Clara whispered. "You don't," Elena said. "You start different." For the first time, Clara smiled, a faint, broken thing that looked almost human. The next morning, Victor returned. The headlines were brutal, but the air around him felt lighter. He walked through the door carrying a small folder. "It's done," he said simply. "I resigned as chairman, sold my shares. It's time someone else runs the empire." Elena glanced at the papers. "You're giving it all up?" "Not all," he said. "Some of it will go toward a foundation. For domestic workers. For women like your mother." Elena's eyes softened. "That won't bring her back." He nodded. "No. But maybe it'll stop another Maria from disappearing." The two stood in silence. Between them hung something unspoken, an understanding, a shared grief that no apology could erase. Victor extended his hand, not for forgiveness, but for acknowledgement. After a pause, Elena shook it. By afternoon, the storm cleared. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows for the first time in weeks, touching everything that had once been cold. Elena packed her small bag, the same one she'd arrived with, though now it carried less weight. She took one last look at the mansion, the walls that had held her anger, her pain, her truth. Margaret found her near the front gate. "You sure you're ready, dear?" Elena smiled faintly. "I've been ready my whole life." The older woman nodded, eyes misting. "Your mother would be proud." Elena looked toward the horizon, the air crisp with the scent of wet earth. "I hope so," she murmured. Behind her, the mansion stood silent, not as a symbol of power anymore, but of consequence. Inside, Clara moved quietly through the halls, clearing away the grand portraits and setting aside her jewelry, as though stripping herself of a skin that no longer fit. Upstairs, Victor sat at his desk, drafting letters to finalize the foundation in Maria's name. The house was still haunted, but by something gentler now. Remorse, not pride. As Elena stepped out through the gates, the gravel crunching beneath her shoes, she felt lighter. Not healed, not yet, but free. The wind brushed her face, carrying with it the faint scent of roses from the garden her mother once tended. She looked back only once, long enough to whisper, "Goodbye." Then she walked toward the road, her figure shrinking against the morning light, leaving behind a house that was finally learning how to breathe again. In the distance, the mansion stood beneath the breaking sun, its shadows shorter, its ghosts quieter. Forgiveness hadn't erased the pain, but it had softened its edges. And somewhere, Elena hoped, her mother was smiling. The mansion had gone quiet long before the world stopped caring about the Bennetts. Months had passed since the last car left. The gravel drive, but the house still stood like a monument to everything that had been lost. Dust settled over the chandeliers, ivy crawled up the marble pillars, and the grand piano, once Clara's pride, sat out of tune in the empty hall. When the wind blew through the cracked window panes, the whole place seemed to sigh, like it finally had the right to grieve. But the story didn't end there. Not for everyone. A few streets away, in a modest, two-story brick building that smelled faintly of fresh bread and lavender soap, Elena wiped her hands on her apron and smiled at the laughter spilling from the next room. 6 women sat around a long wooden table, sewing, laughing, telling stories. The room was warm, alive in a way the Bennett mansion never was. On the wall hung a small plaque that read, "Maria's Home." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Each woman here carried her own scars, some visible, others quiet and buried. Widows, single mothers, maids who had been cast aside by the same kind of cruelty Elena once faced. They found safety here, not as servants, but as equals. Every morning, Elena brewed coffee strong enough to wake the heart, opened the curtains wide, and filled the space with sunlight her mother would have loved. Sometimes, when no one was looking, she caught herself tracing the edge of the windowsill, remembering the marble floors of the mansion, the smell of polish and fear. Those memories still came, but they no longer hurt the same way. They were ghosts, gentle now, reminders, not chains. A radio hummed softly in the background as she served lunch that afternoon. The announcer's voice crackled between stations, then settled. In business news, former magnate Victor Bennett has officially retired from public life. Sources confirm he has completed the transfer of his charitable foundation to independent trustees, focusing on protections for domestic workers and low-income families. Elena froze for a moment, spoon mid-air. The women kept talking, unaware of the weight those words carried. She turned slightly, listening as the announcer continued. Mr. Bennett has declined interviews, citing a desire for a quieter existence. A quiet existence. She pictured him, no longer surrounded by boardrooms and cameras, but perhaps tending to the gardens he once ignored. It was strange, she thought, how even the mighty eventually crave peace. Later that evening, as twilight slipped through the curtains, one of the younger women approached her with a notebook. "Miss Elena, do you think we could start teaching the others how to read?" she asked. Elena smiled. "Of course. We'll begin tomorrow, one chapter at a time." The girl grinned and ran off, her laughter echoing down the hall. Elena sat back, exhaling softly. Her mother would have loved this place, the warmth, the noise, the shared resilience. It was built from everything Maria stood for: dignity, compassion, and a kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The sun dipped lower, and shadows stretched across the wooden floor. She was locking up when she heard the soft scrape of paper against the front door. Someone had slipped an envelope through the gap. Her name was written across it in elegant handwriting she hadn't seen in months. Clara Bennett? Elena hesitated before opening it. The paper inside was thick, the ink dark and deliberate. Only one line was written: "Thank you for teaching me what true service means." No signature, no address, just that. Elena stood there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly between her fingers. Outside, the last of the daylight painted the sky gold. She read the line again, slower this time, feeling the weight of it sink in. Clara Bennett, the woman who once burned with envy, who once ruled through cruelty, was now somewhere out there. Anonymous, giving instead of taking, and somehow that was enough. Elena folded the letter and placed it inside a small wooden box by the window, the same box that held her mother's locket. She touched it gently, her eyes glistening in the fading light. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain through the open window. A few droplets tapped against the glass, steady and calm. She turned toward them, smiling faintly. "The world hasn't changed much, has it, Mama?" she whispered. "But maybe we did." Her reflection in the glass looked softer than she remembered. Older, wiser, free. Behind her, laughter rose again from the hall, the sound bright and full of life. She walked to the window and opened it wider, letting the cool air wash over her face. The street outside glowed under the lamplight, quiet but alive. Somewhere far away, the ruins of the Bennett Empire slept beneath the same sky. Elena looked up at the stars beginning to break through the clouds, her voice barely more than a breath. "It's over now." For a moment, the wind seemed to still, as if listening. Then it moved on, rustling the leaves, carrying her words into the night. And in that small home filled with laughter and healing, something sacred took root. Not wealth, not power, but the quiet kind of hope that endures long after the fire has gone out. The world outside remained cruel, unpredictable. But here, within these walls, something good had grown from the ashes. Elena smiled, the sound of life filling the air once more. And as the light faded, the house stood in gentle contrast to the darkness beyond, a testament that even the most broken stories can end with peace. I hope you felt something in this story. Hit like, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments what part stayed with you.